photorealism. In fact, one of the things I was going to acknowledge without going into depth was that there is a lot of painting that is based on photography, and that's a strong theme or recurrent thing in a lot of contemporary painting. And again, I'm highly critical of it and suspect of it in most cases, because I think it's possible to paint well and with interestingly from photographs. But too often I feel that it's something that people do out of convenience, because working on the flat picture plane from a representation already cuts out a whole lot of complications and difficulties that arise when working from life. It also means that you don't have to bother to go on the spot and experience the subject. Now, certain people use photographs and they're an aide-memoire, in other words, they sort of jog the memory. Some people interpret them in a way that is as fresh as they would interpret an actual subject in front of them. That's great. Where this painting sits, I mean, I think it's a better than most example of a kind of photographic painting. And I think it's an interesting subject. I think it really asks you to go up the steps. It sounds like a stupid thing to say, but the care and the time that has been taken to render what is a fairly unremarkable patch of suburbia, I think that's where this picture becomes a more interesting painting of this kind than many that I've seen. And I think there is some sensitivity in the handling of paint. For example, I mean, I find the most interesting aspects of it for me are where the slicker, more controlled aspects of the representation cease, and the artist is forced into a more has a problem to solve. How do I do this dappled light? And all of a sudden the paint starts to build up and control is lost. And on those aspects of the painting where the photograph has provided a clearer outline, the film of paint is much more even and dead, in my view. And that's interesting as well, because if I come back to the theme I began with about deliberation and spontaneity, the deliberation and slow work that is in the slicker parts of this painting, and then what comes out spontaneously when you have a problem to deal with, there is a lesson already, I think, that if you make the process too mechanical, if the process of putting the paint down is not linked to some deeper consideration, then how could it be interesting? So, yeah, I'd like to talk about this painting, number 18 by Jane Canfield, just briefly. Last year in the talk that I talked about tonalism, and this is a fairly tonal painting, tonal meaning that brilliant colour is suppressed, and it's more about darks and lights, greys, etc., mid-tones. This reminds me a lot of the Australian painter called William Frater, who was sort of a plein air painter of the 1940s, influenced by Cézanne. He always had a kind of a patch of orange, that really Australian, almost blue mountains. It makes me think of the Blue Mountains, this painting, you know, very, very treed, but with a kind of a view through to distance and houses, perhaps. I talked, in the quote that I read out at first by Adrian Stokes, he talked about identification with the object on the one hand, and then being kind of apart from the object on the other. And in this painting, the two are woven together really interestingly. Objects are delineated and separated in areas, but only select areas. And what binds the painting together is this mid-tone kind of gateway where trees almost don't exist. I mean, yes, we have trees, we have these enormous patches that are trees, but come on, if you didn't have a house there, and if you didn't have a pole there, would you actually know that that is a tree? There are no leaves, it's a shape, it's an abstract shape. And this is what often comes up in tonal painting, because it's a shape language of this tone next to that tone. The artist effortlessly achieves a kind of abstractness within figuration and strong description. Yep, am I communicating that clearly enough? And so that to me is the charm, I suppose, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I think this is a nice painting, and nice is fine for me, nice is enough. I think this is a really nice painting. Okay. Do you want to move through? Okay. Here I think what the artist is trying to achieve is a sense of sensation. In other words, colour, whether you use it to describe the landscape or not, already has a sense, already achieves sensation. I mean, red next to yellow is a different sensation to blue next to green. The former is warmth, the latter is cool, and much of 20th century art was about that exploration of colour for its own sake, and contemporary art continues to be, a lot of contemporary art continues to look at that. So this is just another version, I would say, of that by now traditional and familiar strand of art that seeks to find, well, first of all, find a structure in which colour can be allowed to live, I suppose. I don't know, yeah, that's probably enough, except to say that sensation, colour sensation and landscape sensation, because the sun on your back is a landscape sensation, or the wind in your hair. Colour sensation is now used to evoke landscape sensation without there necessarily being a recognisable landscape, and that's where I would place this work.